US ambassador threatens airport preclearance. Here is what that really means. Buddy, if they pull preclearance, are you ready to spend your vacation in a DHS line instead of Vegas? US ambassador in Ottawa, Pete Hoekstra, just told Canadian business leaders the US may take a look at airport preclearance because fewer Canadians are flying south.
Matter of fact, the numbers are down. We're not sure we can make the numbers work anymore because this is pre-clearance is something that is done at the expense of the U.S. government.
To me, it was like a threat saying, all right, if you don't come, we're going to cut out pre-clearance.
Are you paying for this with time and taxes while Ottawa shrugs? Because this is not just tourism drama. It's about our border, our airlines, and our leverage with the Americans. And if you think NORAD and NATO pressure won't bleed into this, stick around. Here is today's plan. Fast and simple. What Hoekstra actually said and why it landed like a threat. The hard numbers behind the Canadian travel slump. What pre-clearance is, who pays for what, and how losing it smacks Canadian travelers and airlines. The defense angle. How cross-border friction ripples into NORAD. What we know versus what we don't. The animated exchange that set everybody off. At the Global Business Forum in Banff, Ambassador Pete Hoekstra was pressed on the plunge in Canadian trips to the US. He said the US might need to take a look at pre-clearance because the numbers are down, and snapped at a moderator who framed it as a threat. Yes, as a threat. Translation? If fewer Canadians fly south, why should we keep paying US officers to staff Canadian airports? That lands as leverage, pressure on Canadians to come back or else. Multiple outlets characterized it exactly that way. The numbers. How bad is the slump? It's not vibes, it's data. StatsCan shows Canadian return trips by air from the US fell 25.8% in July of 2025 versus July of 2024. 7 straight months of declines. By land, Canadian return trips from the US dropped 33% in June of 2025 year over year, the 6th straight monthly decline. Canadians are steering clear of US trips through the summer.
It's pretty foolish to take it away. You want to try and get as many people on planes and traveling as you can.
It would impact my decision to travel. Like, it would be a barrier for sure.
So yes, flights cut, Vegas runs down, and airlines trimming schedules. It all makes sense in that context. But the fix is not to make the border slower. Before we go any further, please like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Subscribing to my channel is not going to cost you anything, but it does help me big time. Thank you. Now back to our topic. What pre-clearance actually is, and who pays? Pre-clearance means you clear US customs in Canada before boarding. When you land in the States, you arrive like a domestic passenger. No giant immigration line. Canada has US pre-clearance at 8 major airports. Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, Calgary, Edmonton, Ottawa, Winnipeg, and Halifax. Plus Prince Rupert for the Alaska Ferry. It's built on a treaty, the 2015 Land, Rail, Marine, and Air Transport Pre-Clearance Agreement, fully in force since 2019. The legal plumbing is there for reciprocal sight, even on US soil for Canadian officers. Cost-wise, airports provide facilities, the US staffs and runs the CBP operations. That's why Washington cares about numbers. If volumes crater, they start eyeing staffing bills. Now, why should you care? Because the moment pre-clearance disappears, every Canadian heading to the US hits the post-arrival bottleneck in America. Business travelers lose hours. Families miss connections. Airlines eat operational mess. This is one of the few border programs that saves both sides time and money. If you want Canadians back, you don't threaten to rip out the express lane. The security and defense angle, the part nobody on TV explains. Border architecture is part of defense readiness, especially for a country stapled to the US economy and security umbrella. First, NORAD isn't just jets and radar, it's daily, boring binational cooperation. When political talking points turn the border into a punishment tool, cooperation costs go up in time, trust, and budgets. Second, supply chains, tourism falling is one thing. Degrading airport throughout is another. Canada's cross-border network feeds cargo belly space and crew rotations that also support continental resilience in emergencies. Gum up the airports. You gum up flexibility. The same flexibility we brag about when we deploy, surge, or divert assets with the Americans. Third, leverage. The LRMA is reciprocal on paper. Canada could expand our side. We are piloting land preclearance concepts, but we rarely use it with teeth. If Washington waves preclearance as a stick, Ottawa should put reciprocal expansion and modernization on the table, not just plead. Finally, optics and allied pressure. This happens while the US is already leaning on allies about NATO 2%, Arctic surveillance, and NORAD modernization. If cross-border friction grows, expect the pressure to show up in those files too, because it always does. Let's talk about what it means to everyday Canadian. Let's bring this down to Tim's level. You paid for the flight, took time off, got the kids hyped. With pre-clearance, you breeze through in Toronto and land in Phoenix, like a domestic passenger. Without it, welcome to an hour-plus DHS snake line and a missed connection to grandma's. That's not convenience. That's real money and real stories and real stress. For business travelers, pre-clearance is where some of those applications get processed cleanly. Kill that option, and you have just moved the friction to ports that are not set up for the surge. What we know versus what we don't. Here is what we know. Hoytstroff said Washington may take a look at pre-clearance amid lower Canadian travel. In a tense exchange with the former diplomat at BAMF's Global Business Forum, Canadian travel to the US is down sharply. By air, 25.8% year over year in July, and by land, 33% year over year in June. And that's coming from Stats Canada. Pre-clearance exists at 8 Canadian airports and runs under the 2015 LRMA implemented in 2019. The US staffs CBP operations while Canadian airports provide facilities. Let's take a look at what we don't know. Whether DHS CBP actually plan to cut hours, freeze hiring, or close any specific Canadian pre-clearance sites. Whether Ottawa has a formal contingency to expand reciprocal pre-clearance on US soil to restore symmetry if Washington squeezes. Which airports would be hit first? The high-volume hubs? Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, or other stations. When those specifics drop, we will update with proofs. Okay, so what should Ottawa do today? 1. Call the bluff with data. StatsCan shows the drop clearly, but also show Washington that U.S. residents' trips to Canada by air were up slightly year over year. So, both sides benefit from keeping throughput smooth. 2. Tie this to NORAD modernization. not as a threat, but as a package. If the US wants allies stepping up on defense, and Canada is investing billions in continental warning, then don't kneecap the airport flow that supports the same ecosystem. 3. Reciprocity lever. Fast track 1 or 2 Canadian-run preclearance pilots on US soil. The treaty allows it, not to punish, but to normalize reciprocity and create bargaining chips for hours and staffing. 4. Airline reality check. Porter, WestJet, Air Canada. If Washington squeezes, push for joint staffing plans at peak times instead of blanket cuts. It's cheaper than stranded crew and rebook chaos. Here is the truth. Border architecture is invisible when it works and brutally visible when it does not. Preclearance is the quiet plumbing of the Canada-US relationship. Rip it out, and you don't just annoy tourists, you erode the very trust that keeps NORAD humming and our economy moving. So, tell me in the comments below, do you change your travel plans if pre-clearance hours shrink or vanish at your home airport? And if you have been stuck in a US arrival line for 90 minutes, drop your story below. Because this is not just about Vegas trips. It's about whether we let Washington weaponize the lineup. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.